Well, you're very welcome to join us for today's webinar, Talking Together. I'm John Dudley, and I have the privilege of being the British Association of Social Workers elected Honorary Treasurer. And as BASW marks its 50th anniversary this year, I chair our Heritage Steering Group, this being the first of a series of heritage-themed events. And for me personally, 2020 also marks 40 years since I qualified as a social worker. That went quickly, and no 2 days the same. I'm delighted to be joined by a wonderful selection of speakers to spark off our conversation, encompassing a range of social work backgrounds and experience, and spanning each of the 4 nations and beyond. Most are able to be here in person, 2 have provided recorded pieces, and I will introduce them all shortly. We intend this will be an interactive session, and I invite you to submit questions or comments via the questions box, which you should find on your screen. And please send these in as you think of them to avoid any last-minute rush at the end. They can be general queries or specific to any of us present on the panel. And thank you in advance to BASW colleagues Jane Shears and Steph Davis, who are busy behind the scenes helping to make this event happen. The webinar is being recorded so that it will be available to people not able to join with us here today. Now, the format will be that we'll have 3 short talks of 5 or so minutes each. The first will be live, the next 2 pre-recorded, then we'll pause for any immediate questions before moving on to 4 more short, thought-provoking presentations. At this point, the panel will respond to your questions, concerns, or comments as we consider how our past, present, and future are connected, leading up to our 50th anniversary, marking the establishment of BASW from the coming together of its 7 predecessor organisations in June 1970. Today is the 19th of May 2020, and these are extraordinary times. Many of us have faced tests and challenges we couldn't have anticipated even a few months ago. Some of us have lost colleagues, friends, and relatives to an unseen killer. These people we mourn, and we will remember them. But as the song we've just heard says, it's times like these we learn to live again. It's times like these we give and give again. It's times like these we learn to love again. And for some of us, the fact that we've been dashing around the countryside perhaps a little bit less than usual has given more opportunity to reflect on our own life and times, personally and professionally, the people and places that we cherish, the role that our professional ethics and values play in addressing complex new issues, how we can reclaim and re-establish our position as critical workers, as key workers within our communities, part of a response that enables a wider definition of public health and well-being to embrace the health of society as a whole and the vital importance of equality across all its facets. So, to our speakers, who I'm sure will give you a wave as I introduce them. It does look a little bit like a university challenge here. First, we have a professional officer from BASW Cymru, Meryl Williams. From the University of Cardiff, Abid Quinn Aziz. All the way from Northern Ireland, member of the Social Workers Union Executive, Gerry Madden. And adding an international perspective, we welcome independent social worker Heidi Henderson. Hi, Heidi. And our 2 pre-recorded addresses come from Becky Haberley, a social worker and practice educator in England with lived experience as a recipient of social work services, and also from Emeritus Professor of Social Work at the University of Edinburgh, Viv Cree. But to start, very much live and with us here today, I'm delighted to welcome author, publisher, practice educator and renowned figure in social work education, Siobhan McLean. So over to you, Siobhan.
Thank you, John. I'm not sure I've ever been described as renowned before, so that's taken me by surprise. Thank you very much. Can I have the next slide, please? So I've, in 5 minutes, going to talk a little bit about the past, the present and the future of my social work career. So that's quite a challenge in keeping to 5 minutes. So in front of you there, you'll just see a little picture that I've put together showing that career and showing, I suppose, a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. So we'll start with a little bit of the history of social work. I have a CQSW, which is a certificate in the qualification of social work. And back in the days when I qualified, and John, having been qualified 40 years, will remember this, you had to be a minimum of 22 to hold a CQSW, and you had to be younger than 50. We were very ageist in those days. I actually completed my placement before I was 22, and so my certificate is dated on my 22nd birthday. I will therefore never forget the actual day that I became a social worker. You'll now all be able to tell how old I am, because I'm going to tell you that I have this year been qualified as a social worker for 30 years. I've also been a member of BASW for 33 years, having joined as a student, and always, I think, valuing that membership in all of the work that I've done. When I first qualified as a social worker, we worked generically on a patch base. So we worked with everybody who lived in a particular area. And during those 30 years, I've worked in a whole range of different roles as a social worker. For a short time, just over 7 years ago, I received some social care services when I had a stroke and was in hospital and rehab services for some time. So I have a very varied experience of social work to draw on. So trying to talk about that in 5 minutes was a challenge to me. So I decided to talk to you about the single framework that I've taken with me through my whole career. I've been trying to remember where I actually originally got this framework from, because I can't reference it to anywhere. I think it's just something that either somebody shared with me in my own training or something that I picked up very early in my career. But I've always used a framework of what, why, how. 3 really basic questions. So if I've been going out to see somebody, if I'm working with a family, I'd be looking at what's happening for this family. Why has this situation come about? How can I work with them to bring about improved outcomes? Most of the time now, I work in a learning and development role, and now I use that very same framework to think about what does this student need to learn? Why is that important? How can I help them to learn that? One of the things, though, that's concerned me about social work over the years is that the why question has started to fall off our agenda. Sometimes things are so busy for us and there's so much bureaucracy that what happens is we go out and we're looking at what's happening, how do I deal with it, what's going on, how do I respond, and we lose that essential why. I think COVID-19 has had a huge impact on our practice and the way our practice is changing at the moment. I'm really excited to be working. I've just come out of a reflective group supervision session with a number of social workers. And the things that I'm learning from social workers about practice at the moment, one of the key things is, I think it's making us revisit our why. Why do we do this? Why are we social workers? Why are we doing this? Because in many ways, we've got to change what we do. We can't go out and visit somebody. So we need to look at why were we going to do that and then try and fulfill that in a different way. So I think it's making us really revisit our why. So in terms of sharing with you today, I suppose the question for me, why did I become a social worker? And I think I became a social worker, or I was driven towards becoming a social worker all those years ago, because I had a really strong sense of social justice and human rights. And I saw our profession as the profession of social justice and human rights. During my training and over the years, I have also really thought about social work as the profession of hope. And I think for me, hope has been the central core theme to everything that I've done as a social worker. So if we put those 2 things together, we put that basic framework of what, why, and how, and hope together, I suppose for me, that's the future of social work. In many ways, the why remains the same. So through a 30-year career, why I became a social worker, why I do social work has never changed. What it is, what I'm asked to do, how I do it, all of that stuff changes, but why I do it has never changed. And so the why for us as social workers should remain the same. We can and we will develop over the next 30 years and beyond new how we do things. Some new aspects of what we do will change, but why will never change. And I suppose I've been surrounded by, you know, when we go out on a Thursday night and we clap and everybody's talking about our NHS colleagues and how a marvellous job that they're doing, and they are. But the phrase that I've heard in the adverts is asking people to step up and save lives. And I think as social workers, we can step up and save hope. Hope is really important. Everybody has hope. Sometimes that hope can be diminished. And as social workers, what we can do is step up and save hope. The music that we opened with, I'd never heard before, and it actually got me a little bit. I found myself a bit emotionally, emotionally choked a little bit by it. But that had the words that we need to learn to love again and learn to live again. And I think maybe in times like these, social work can learn to hope again. And so it's back to John. I hope I stuck with the 5 minutes. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thank you for your reflections. And please don't forget to post any questions that you have for Siobhan or any of our other speakers in the question box. And now we'll move on to our two pre-recorded speakers. And we're going to start with Becky Haberley, who will tell us about her social work journey. And we'll just take a moment or two just to load up the video on that.
Hello, my name is Becky Haberley, and this is part of my social work journey. I have lived in Coventry all of my life. I have two boys, one is 26 and one is 16. I qualified in 2009 at Coventry University, the first person in my family to go to university. I currently work in the early help arena. However, due to COVID-19, I'm currently supporting social care. I love shoes and own a ridiculous amount, and killing Eve is absolutely one of my current priorities. I dream one day to not be working and spending my time on golf courses across the world. When I was 3, we left my dad and brother and moved into a hostel. I had no regular family time with my brother until we were quite a bit older. Court agreed my brother would stay with my dad and I would go with my mum to the battered wives' home, as my mum called it. I remember a child there used to bite people and they bit me a lot. We were also not allowed to play in the street, so had to play in the garden, which was nearly nothing at all. I remember one day a mattress had been put up against the wall to be taken away. I bounced on it for fun and bounced straight off, breaking my wrist. I fight tooth and nail for families when things like the government-driven benefit cap forces them into homelessness. It's wrong and it's traumatic. It should be illegal. The long-term impact of homelessness stays with you. It stayed with me. There's that fear your home will be pulled from under you. One family that was staying in the battered wives' home with me when I was a child had been moved from out of their home city for their safety and moved to Coventry. The dad turned up one night, I remember, and tried to strangle the mum in the bathroom. We were all there, having fled DV for safety. My dad worked but was never pushed or expected to pay maintenance, so we lived in poverty. Social work with fathers is still an issue and there is not enough focus on poverty or finances. For an absent parent not to pay and support their child is neglectful and should be deemed as such. My first social worker was posh, with a clean car. She used to stare at me and never had games. My mum said she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, not a clue about life. I just couldn't talk to her. She was actually boring. In terms of COVID-19, I've been collecting donations and delivering colouring books, reading books, packs of cards, top trumps, dominoes. I even had a big, beautiful doll's house. This is important as I remember being stuck in during the summer holidays. Sometimes because all the money had gone on drink, there was no food, so we were not allowed out to play as we'd shoplift food. I remember the feeling of being lightheaded and sleeping a lot. I'm not sure I really knew at the time that it was due to hunger. I didn't have any toys either, really, so I always make sure that children I support do. I've never ever had a Barbie doll in my whole life. Is there anything wrong with asking a family if they want some toys someone has donated? Most people I know have been extremely grateful, and it's about the children, isn't it? This was my second social worker I had when I was 14. This is Bernice and her daughter and her granddaughter. They are both studying social sciences. Bernice messaged me recently saying, "And with you, I have a right little posse," referring to me as almost like one of her own. That means so much to me. In her mind, I am special, I am loved, and she is proud of me. I remember sitting at a meeting around a big table. My mum and dad both took it in turns to say, "Well, I don't wanna." I thought I would crumble. My heart actually ached. So I ran from the room completely sobbing and broken. Bernice ran after me, not either of my parents to comfort me, and she got me a fag when I asked, sobbing. When I was a kid, I saw her around my community. She always listened to me, and I just had this feeling she cared about me. She tells me she is proud of me even now. I remember bumping into her in a supermarket years ago and I said, "Guess what I am?" She said, "A social worker." I was a youth worker at the time and laughed. She told me she knew I'd do well and she knew that I was going to be a social worker. I'm sure I was a nightmare for her doing runners from the foster carer, but I still get a feeling in my tummy at 45 years old when she sends me a message or comments on my Facebook pictures. Back in the day, I could go into the office and ask to see her. I feel sad it's changed in that way for children and young people. I'm sure it was annoying when you're trying to get your paperwork done, but it felt like a bit of a safety net to me. So here's me. I'm a social worker. I'm passionate about my job and proud of what I've achieved. In terms of COVID-19 and working at the moment, I wonder what the aftermath will look like. I'm resentful my kitchen is an office. I also think staff will reflect and be very conscious of how they were treated by managers, local authorities at this time. I'm sad that, as usual, social work is not celebrated or recognised in the way it should be by the media and the public, but then we need to get better at celebrating ourselves too. I believe in real relationship-based practice. I have seen too much of them-and-us attitude from social workers towards families. Any one of us could need services at some point in our lives, and some of us already have. Some of the training I have attended about the Troubled Families Agenda and the ACEs make my blood boil, and at times I've seen colleagues in a very different light. We need to focus on the positives, put some effort in, and really get to know our families. We cannot expect immediate change. We need time to spend with families, to understand them and their story. We cannot ignore poverty. It takes over everything, every thought, your feelings, your self-worth, but also your concentration ability to do and be what you want to be. In fact, you possibly don't even know the options that are out there in terms of getting to where you want to be if poverty is consuming you. I want us to think about what we need to help families succeed, to stay together. How can we have care in our title or services if we are taking people along a journey they do not want? Some workers say to me, if we had more time, if we had more money, I think we could work with this family and keep the children together. This is not okay. I want to see social work of the future standing up and being proud, fighting for the rights of the oppressed, not just going along with these acts of violence against the most vulnerable. We have to stand up for ourselves too. We deserve to be recognised for the work we do. I would love to see us being visible in the communities we serve, Most workers drive in and drive out of the area they work in each day. They have no insight into that community or what happens there. This is why I opted for early help. It's innovative and creative, it's real and it's open-ended. People say hello in the street and invite me in for a coffee. I'm still pointing out their behaviours and the impact they will have on their children, but we have a relationship, like one of those friends you call upon when you need a wake up or a pep talk. I don't want the workers of the future to be ticking boxes, trying to catch people out and just constantly assessing where they could be modelling, listening or putting the kettle on. People need people. They also need nurture and love to grow and space to navigate a new pathway. We all make mistakes and we all deserve a chance. My pride, my journey and my achievement. My boys. I asked them both to describe me in 3 words for this webinar. The older one said, strong, bossy and intelligent. My youngest said, loud, confident and genuine. I'm absolutely gutted they didn't say completely hilarious, but you can't have it all. They have been lucky. I made the choice they would never go without or struggle like me. The oldest has an amazing work ethic. He is an artist and amazes me with his talent and earns way more money than me. The little one is 16 years old. He's in year 11, getting through COVID-19 on the PlayStation. He's applied to do A-levels in English literature, history and sociology. He's my little geek. I love them both, but they are both opinionated and were challenging, but thankfully liked at school. I'm not sure where they got that from. They both have the best stories about me attending meetings at school, but that's for another time. Thanks for listening and do social work proud.
Well, thanks very much to Becky for taking the time to record that for us and to tell us a little bit about her journey into social work and how her lived experience relates to that. So thank you, Becky. And we're going to move straight on now to the second of our pre-recorded sessions. This is Viv Cree, who, as I've said, is from Edinburgh University. I think we've got a picture of her to start. Next slide. Yeah, and then we're straight into the video. Okay. Oh, and this also is the book that Viv has edited. So I think we'll move straight into her presentation. Thank you, Steph.
Hello, my name is Viv Cree. I'd like to thank BASW for inviting me to join you all today for the celebrations of BASW's birthday. I've been a social worker for many years. I'm now retired and have recently re-registered as a social worker in the hope that I might be called on to do something of use to others, because that's what social workers try to do most of all. I'm very lucky. I'm living in a beautiful part of the world in rural Perthshire. I went for a run this morning along the banks of the River Tilt. The sun was shining, the birds were tweeting. It was absolutely idyllic. And my thought, first and last, is how different it is for other people and their experiences of COVID. I've joined the local volunteer group. I'm a resilience volunteer. What that's meant so far has just been, I've been doing gardening for neighbours, I've been delivering leaflets, I've done some shopping, and so far that's been it. How different people's experiences are in other parts of the world and indeed in other parts of Scotland, where populations are very much less dispersed than they are here. So my thoughts go to everybody at this very difficult time. It's a time, though, when we're doing a lot of reflecting, looking back and forward. I've spent a lot of my working life trying to make sense of social work. Why was I a social worker, and what was it about me and my upbringing that brought me into social work? And that's a question that I've asked others to reflect on too. In a book which was published many years ago now called Becoming a Social Worker, there was a second edition much more recently. And what Becoming a Social Worker did was invited people to tell their stories of coming into social work. What was it about you that brought you into this profession? And indeed, is social work a profession, and what's it all about? Many of us growing up don't have contact with social work, except perhaps through the press and the stories that appear from time to time, occasionally on dramas. Mostly, we have little contact with social work unless we've been a user of services ourselves. And of course, I've just said something which is so important, because many of us in our lifetimes will be users of services for all kinds of reasons, and we will all need social work and social care at some point in our lives, chances are. So it's been important to me that those entering the social work profession were as thoughtful and as well trained as they can be in order to help those who they work with in the best possible way. And I guess for me that's been about trying to understand people and societies and groups and communities, and try to understand that need to and wish to make a contribution to make things better. So as BASW celebrates its birthday, so now I've been involved more recently in a family history project where I've tried to understand who my family were and who they are in relation to other people. This has taken me into surprising places. Not only have I discovered that I have relatives all over the world that I didn't know, but I also have relatives who were, for example, transported in 1834 to New South Wales. So we all have stories in our past that we can learn from today. And my message, I guess, if there is one for all of us as we go forward, is that I'm proud to be a social worker. We don't always get it right. We won't. We make mistakes. We sometimes overclaim on behalf of social work. We're sometimes defensive. But most of all, there is a kind of deep willingness and wish to engage with other people and to get to know others and treat others as we would wish to be treated. And these are old messages. These are old messages from childhood. They're also old messages from around the world about the need for care for each other as we share this planet and try to do our best. And that's really all I want to say for today. And for tomorrow, on with the Family History Project and on with trying to understand better who I am and where I fit in this crazy and sometimes distressing and yet wonderful world. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Viv, for providing your personal reflections on times like these. We're going to pause just briefly now, just to pick up one or two questions, and thank you to those of you listening for your questions and comments that are coming in. A lot of people appreciating the directness and the honesty that Becky was showing in her presentation, and it's good to hear that. So do keep the questions and comments coming in. I'm just going to pick up a couple of questions now, if I might, with the panel, and there's a really interesting one here, which perhaps we'll start with. The question is, in these current times, does the panel think social work has lost or found its way? So there's a big question for us. Has social work lost or found its way in this time? And could I perhaps ask Abid to start us off on that?
An easy question to start with, thank you. I was thinking that, and I saw the question come up, and I suppose some of that is reflected in what I'll talk about. I really hope that we remember the lessons of this time, that yes, perhaps we've lost our way, because hopefully what we've seen is that the way we were wasn't the best way, and that there are different ways that we're being, which are better ways. And I know it is that corny saying about, you know, the old normal didn't work, but actually we live in the 5th largest economy in the world. A third of our children live in poverty. Our older people are hidden away in, out of the way, looked after by poorly paid, marginal people. That's not success. That's not a good way. And I don't mind losing that if we find a better way. And I hope one of the things about things like this is that we listen to the lessons and we learn them and we hold on to them and we move on and we move forward.
Thanks very much, Abid. And perhaps the same question to you, Siobhan, then. Has social work lost or found its way, do you think? What's your view on that?
Sorry, just had to unmute. Okay, I think I very much agree with what Abid said. I think that there's elements of, as a profession, that we had lost our way. I think we'd become overly bureaucratic, and I think that sometimes we'd lost that sense of being very politically connected. We are a political profession, and I think we needed to be politically connected. And I think maybe we'd lost some elements of that. And I suppose centrally, going back to what I was saying, I think we'd lost aspects of the why. Why are we doing this? And we'd got much more caught up in what we were doing. So I don't know, I'm just thinking about my own practice. So working with students, I might say to a student, why are we going on this visit? And they'd say, well, it's a statutory visit or something. They'd tell me what it was, but not why we were doing it. And I think the why is the really important aspect of that. Too much bureaucracy, I think, too much poverty, that, you know, as Becky said, huge amounts of poverty that I think we were failing to see the impact of that. It just become so normalized to us, so much part of practice. And I think maybe as a profession we need to be arguing more about that, the impact of poverty, rather than at times I think potentially laying that blame with the individual, so responsibilizing the individual rather than responsibilizing society. And I think as a profession we were doing too much with individuals and not enough with society. And maybe that's something that's changing as part of this, the pandemic and the response. But I certainly think there's some elements of practice that I think have been really good as a result. I've heard about, and I know that people are aware that the people that they support, the people that they work with, have been perhaps more resilient than they thought they would be in this pandemic, that they've been more able to deal with technology and so on. And I think it's surprising social workers who previously may have lost sight of the strength of individuals and communities. So possibly we'd lost sight, but I always like to be hopeful and optimistic and say, but still, I don't know if it's social work that had done that, or if it was the organisations in which social workers are employed that had lost sight of what we can do as professionals. I think maybe we as a profession perhaps hadn't lost sight of it, but our employers maybe had.
Okay, thanks very much, Siobhan, and always good to keep hope alive, I think, especially in these difficult times. Well, please do keep the questions coming in. I think we're going to move on now to our next speaker, so that we will have time for more questions and discussion at the end. So I'm very pleased to welcome Heidi Henderson, who is going to talk to us about knowledge, experience, reflection, adjustment, and the social work life cycle. So over to you, Heidi. I think we have a microphone problem there, Heidi.
Apologies, thank you. I'm very privileged to be here, and I think this links really well with the question we've just been asked around social work changing and losing its way. I qualified in South Africa. I am South African born, and I'm very proud to be South African, but at the moment I am becoming a British citizen. Oh no, I've become a British citizen. I'm just waiting for a passport. I started my social work career at the age of 23. We have a 4-year degree in South Africa when Nelson Mandela had just come out of prison. He was elected during my time as a student to be our first president. And we were celebrating the new South Africa and really excited about the new South Africa. But it was the same time that the HIV pandemic hit crisis point in South Africa. I very soon changed my career to work directly with young people and children afflicted by HIV and AIDS because that was the greatest need at the time. And I can still say that that was perhaps the happiest and saddest time of my career, working with children and young people who had HIV or who were otherwise afflicted to it. It also prepared me for a life where I can continuously question myself and my practice and really think about how is what I'm doing having an impact on society and the people around me. The next slide, please. So when I then thought about, I've lived through a pandemic once, HIV is no longer the threat that it was in the 90s, but certainly COVID-19 had some similarities for me. And when I look at those, we start with the impact on helping professions. And I'm very clear in identifying that it's helping professions who's having an impact because we have care workers are dying, social workers are dying, and we are the people who keep the wheels going of this society whilst everyone is in lockdown. Similarly to HIV, helping professions were on its knees, and we saw an increase in hidden harm. More people were probably exposed to domestic abuse, same as here. More people were exposed to sexual abuse and rape. Neglect and abandonment was overwhelming, and it was affecting poor people to a much higher extent than it was affecting those people who can afford to buy expensive healthcare, because remember, not everywhere in the world has got an NHS that is still free. It also brought along a quite an ugly side to life, because suddenly, and in my experience, you know, I was young and naive, there was a money value added to life. And sadly, it's something that I'm grappling with at the moment. Are we doing this same year when we decide who goes back to school, who doesn't, who you know, who goes into an old age home and who doesn't, and who are the people we're choosing to work with, those most at risk of something that can kill us all. So the children afflicted by HIV and AIDS were also the most likely to miss out on education. They were the most likely to be sexually and otherwise criminally exploited. And they were most likely to visit hospitals where there were no resources, where basically they would just wait to die. Next slide, please. But like Siobhan, there's always an eye on hope. And same with Fabid, there is always thinking about how out of the greatest need comes innovation. And surely in South Africa, that was what was happening. The focus came away from the individual and was bigger, and we started to focus more on public and what we can do on a greater scale. So at the same time, social workers maintained clearly the child protection work that we were doing and the individual work that we were doing, but there was much better recognition for what was already out there in the community and respect for what was out in the communities to pick up those children most at need. And I think it was within the pandemic that I really saw the strength of human resilience, and it will keep me throughout my life because I have seen the most beautiful social work practice, but also the most beautiful side of society alongside this really difficult time. And that is starting to happen now with COVID. I think we see more and more people coming forward, joining voluntary groups like we just talked about, helping their neighbours, telling someone if their neighbours isn't safe, doing the shopping, providing some level of care. And, you know, I think it is really bring forward, back to what David said, that co-production of plans and safety planning. We're actually trusting families again to keep themselves safer. And we can't do it in any other way. So I think that the model of we want to do it is suddenly become you have to do it in this way. And I've seen amazing practice because social workers are starting to plan alongside families as opposed to doing to families. So next slide, please. That just bring me kind of to my final thoughts about reclaiming the value of social work, because we do every week see everyone. Oh, sorry, I just had a noise. So we do every Thursday night, everyone comes claiming you're clapping for the NHS, but I'm clapping for our care workers and our social workers who are still working behind the scenes to make sure everyone is safe, but also who's starting to have more respect for human rights and really thinking about what it means to intervene in a family's life. And how we can better use universal support and make sure we use targeted practice only to only intervene in people's life at that point in time when they need it most, and only for that period in time that they are in need. And you know, that in itself is what I would like to see is how this translates into the future, and will we learn some lessons? Because I think over the last 5 years, we've seen a steady increase of children in care, children subject of child protection plans, children subject of child need plans, and these plans drag and drag and drag with no real impact. And I really want to see, let's go back to that relationship-based social work that we're doing at the moment that's making a real difference and giving families the right to keep themselves safe. Thank you. Back to John.
Thanks very much, Heidi, and so important to maintain an international perspective at this time when the global pandemic, as we know, affects everybody across the nations. And so to Northern Ireland, where we have Gerry Madden waiting for us to give us the benefit of his wisdom over the next 5 minutes. So over to you, Gerry.
Thank you very much, John. Hi, it's Gerry Madden here, a social worker, and I'm also currently treasurer of the Social Workers Union. And I'm really delighted to have this opportunity today to share a few reflections about the necessity and importance of social work in an ever-changing world. And this is certainly something that I feel as passionate about, if not more so, than when I joined the social work profession some 42 years ago, back in 1978. I think the three traditionally recognised foundational pillars of all social work activity are knowledge, skills and values. The first two of these are necessarily sort of evolutionary in nature. Our value base, however, is constant, and it anchors the profession and allows us to be continuously relevant and necessary, whatever the prevailing societal circumstances. I was less than 1 year into my social work career when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, and all that has flowed and continues to reverberate from that down through the years. Fast forwarding to the current crisis, I think a forum like this today, I would firstly want to acknowledge the pivotal role that social workers have played thus far, and indeed the heroism and dedication of all social work and social care staff. Very interestingly, there's already clear evidence of a debate about what a post-COVID-19 society might look like. And this is being framed in terms of publicly funded social care and health services versus the model known as the mixed economy of care that has increasingly dominated for the past 40 years. All too sadly, this debate, however, is taking place against the backdrop of the tragedy that is unfolding in our care homes. I believe that all of this poses enormous challenges, but also real opportunities for social work to both lead and influence this debate using our social work value base to guide and inform us. I'd like to take this opportunity also to say I think there's a crucial role for organisations such as the Social Workers Union to bring a collective social work energy to this debate. There is strength in unity, and unity in turn allows for a clearer expression of the social work voice. Whilst being a trade union member also offers individual social workers a safe place for their expression of that necessarily political element of their social work DNA. And I think this is something that other speakers have already spoken about. Finally, I think this collective energy, we need to also, of course, exercise that energy in partnership with those we are privileged to serve. And I think one of the things we need to bear in mind as we emerge out the far side of this crisis is that alongside added resilience, there will also be increased fragility and vulnerability. And therefore, I think the exercising of this collective social work energy needs to be done in a manner that one of the most famous of Irish poets, W.B. Yeats, says, and I'm going to finish with a quote, and he says, "But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams." Okay, thank you very much, John, and back to yourself.
Thanks very much, Gerry. So important. Thanks very much, Gerry, and so important to appreciate that we are indeed stronger together, and the power of poetry as well. What could be better? So we'll move on, and our final two speakers both come from Wales. And to start, a very warm welcome to Abid Quinn Aziz. So over to you, Abid.
Hello. Just wanted to say thanks for inviting me to speak on this panel. And we had some sort of vague questions to think about, like the social work journey. And I suppose the more I think about my journey, there was no plan. I think I got involved in social work very early. We grew up in Africa. My father used to do work with the mosque around community development. We also used to host refugee people. Not called social work, but it was that kind of the values were there, or the ethics were there. I suppose I going through school, I helped at a special school, and I lived on a council estate. And coincidentally, through COVID, I've ended up being in touch with old school friends of mine. And one of them sent me a picture of the council estate that I grew up on, which luckily has been bulldozed to the ground. It was a 1,000-unit concrete set of tower blocks in West London. And if we think about social problems, that's some of the roots of them. So I became interested. I worked in youth work. At university, I worked in street action, setting up youth clubs in the street for young people. And then when I qualified, I qualified when I got my degree, which was in biology, because that's the subject I liked. I ended up working in a pharmacy in London, a late night pharmacy. And I repeatedly got told off by the managers for talking to these people who are coming to buy, for example, getting their drugs or just coming in for a chat. And often had lots of conversations with prostitutes who would buy packets of 3 condoms. And I'd always ask them, why 3? You know, if you get a box, I'll sell you a box and it'll be cheaper. And they just had to point out, if I get arrested with a box, I'll be done. If I've got 3, that's all right. So another day when I was being told off just for talking to people who possibly had nowhere to go, substance misusers, teenage runaways, as I said, prostitutes. Someone whose mother was a social worker said, "You like talking, get a job as a social worker, that's what they do." And that's where it started. So I worked in a children's home, then I moved into a in mental health hostel. And I suppose that felt really natural. And that's what I mean about finding my place rather than having a plan. I suppose when I worked in the children's home, I didn't feel much more grown up than those children. And when I worked in mental health, the social model, Langian views, yeah, I could understand why some people were doing the things they were doing. But I got to possibly the top of the ladder. I could be acting manager of this hostel, but I could never be manager of the hostel because I wasn't qualified. And I think one of the things that people have said is, you know, I qualified and became a social worker. I was a social worker and I qualified. I came to Cardiff University in the 80s to qualify, but before that I took 3 months off to travel around India, maybe to find myself or maybe to lose myself. Came to Cardiff, went back and went to work in London. I did social work in Southall, which is a very Asian area. I managed a family centre, and then came back to Cardiff, did lots of freelance work, independent child protection sharing, and then family group conferencing. And I think people said about that, we mustn't be that them and us anymore. And I suppose throughout time, that them and us hasn't made sense. And I recognize I'm in a really privileged position. I've got Wi-Fi, I've got a roof, I've got an income. But the them and us, because we are, aren't we? We are. And there'll be a time when I'll need being looked after. So that kind of stuff felt quite strange. I came to Cardiff University. I was doing some bits of teaching and a job came up, and I just thought a 3-year secondment would be brilliant. I can have some time to reflect, think about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. But then we also had a child, and so for the last 16 years, my 16-year-old child, I've been at Cardiff University because I can't go anywhere, because we've got to stay. We've got to stay in this house. I've got to stay in that job. And actually, I love what I do. I suppose fast forwarding, one of the things that I'm involved in around COVID is an online journal that 6 of us have set up. The idea came from Robin Sen, who's a lecturer at Sheffield, and people involved are Bridge Featherstone from Huddersfield, Anna Gupta from Royal Holloway, Gillian McIntyre at Strathclyde, and Christian Kerr, who's a social worker in London. And I suppose that kind of the energizing and the stories and the remembering we're giving voice to academics, but also social workers, social work students, and people who use the services. And there's a theme. There's a theme that's very much around, let's look at the way we do these things. There's a different way, and we're starting to do those. And in some ways, well, not in some ways, I'm actually quite honoured to be part of that. And one of the things I'll do is I'll send the link, and you can have it. It's free, it's online. We planned 4 editions. We've been talked into doing 5, and we may be talked into doing more. The kinds of things we cover: COVID, death, mourning, but also hope, different ways of doing things, mutual support, the kind of changes in legislation, looking at some of the safeguarding that's going in England. We'll look at how things are different in Wales. And I suppose one of the authors in this edition, Curator, talks about the job of social work is to drive through changes so that we're no longer needed. We should be working to make ourselves not needed. And in some ways, that might explain why when people go out to clap the NHS workers, they don't clap us, because we hold up a mirror to society. It's not those bad people that are doing things wrong. It's society that isn't working right for those people. So, so those kind of ideas possibly prevent us being seen as the heroes, although I think social work is full of heroes. We think about poverty, we think about the disproportionate effect on BME populations. And I suppose for me, and I said that earlier, it's crucial that we hold on to this learning. There are different ways of doing things. We went up a path. We went up a path. We were led up a path, and we need to look at what we were there for. We need to look at the way we look after people. We need to look at the way we co-produce, how we enable people. Surely our job is to help people live to their best and to help them protect themselves if they can't do that. And I suppose the other parts of that, and some quotes, I suppose, as Paulo Freire, a hero, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. That's why I think for us, social work is political. It's a political act. And at the risk of repeating myself from the BASW conference, I talked about the conference of the birds, where all the birds got together to go and find their leader. And they got taken to a lake, and they looked in the lake and they saw reflections of themselves, because they're the leaders and we're the leaders. And the things we need to do is to remember this. So we try and work in a more co-productive way. There are the seminars from IFS, International Federation of Social Workers, that's showing social workers and other professionals working together in a different way. And some of the other kinds of lessons that we've learned throughout history, where Max Weber talks about bureaucracies, where there are people that make the decisions who are so far removed from the people who are actually living those decisions that it doesn't matter. They can make those decisions. They can make those decisions believing that, yeah, anyone can live on £50 a week, because they don't have to. And the people who are enacting those decisions are so far removed, they can't challenge that decision making. So we need to actually change those kinds of things. So that's Max Weber. In the journal, Martin Weber talks about the new way of doing communities. And he's talking about, are we looking back to the past or looking to the future? Is this new way of working what we set out to do? And I suppose for me, people like BASW Ioannidis, who writes about social work and action, I just remember an article where he talked about, we're the kind of people that what's happened is that 9 to 5, we do our social work job, and then all evening we do this political stuff to make the world a better place. And he suggests that they should be one and the same thing. So that's where I am. And I suppose, again, in response to that question earlier, I'm full of hope and energized, and it's up to us to hold on to this.
Thanks very much, Abid, and we will hold on to that hope, but we will move on rapidly if we can, as we're unfortunately running a little short of time, to our final speaker. So we say croeso, welcome to Meryl Williams, and over to you, Meryl.
Diolch yn fawr, John. Prynawn da. Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk briefly about my social work journey and just a few significant events that have shaped and hopefully continue to shape me. 40 years of practice, 40 years of change, 40 years of improvement and development. I trained back in the 70s in Cardiff University, and at that time, I really didn't have any idea what social work was. I sort of fell into that course, and I didn't really know what it entailed. And I suppose, to be fair, social work in the 70s was rather different to what social work is today. However, the basic premise of things like social justice, human rights, empowerment, person-centered approach, anti-discriminatory practice, non-judgmental practice, all of those values that we hold dearly are still the cornerstone of our profession, whether it was back in the 70s or now we're in the 21st century. But back in 1979, I started my career as a social worker in a child and family team in what was then known as the, well, it was West Glamorgan Local Authority. And it hasn't been an easy journey throughout my nearly 41 years as a social worker. And there were times when I felt as if I was going to choose a different profession, but somehow I'm still here and still passionate about social work. Now, change seems to be the only constant that there is in social work, something I suppose we're all acutely aware of at the moment in the days that we're living in. So I want to just reflect on 3 areas where I have been involved in change. Firstly, I want to talk about mental health, the whole field of mental health. I vividly remember during my first week of employment as a very green, inexperienced social worker, I was given a warrant to assess and detain people who had mental health difficulties. But what did I know about this? What experience did I have? Did I have any training in it? The answer to all of those was no, nothing. I didn't know anything about it. I was working in the child and family team. My social work training hadn't equipped me to assess and detain people in a mental health facility, and I had no personal experience of anyone needing this support. Yet there I was, a 22-year-old, given this power and responsibility. Thankfully, I had a supportive team who mentored me through this. Then, just a few years later, we had the 1983 Mental Health Act, and soon after that, the approved social work training and the role. And over the years, what I've seen is training improving and being expanded in the field of mental health. And to the place today, we've got such excellent training around the approved mental health practitioners. All of that I see as a change for the better, definitely so from when I started back in 1979. Now, 1983 was clearly a significant year. It was the year that we not only saw the Mental Health Act, but in Wales, we saw the launch of the All Wales Mental Handicap Strategy. Working in learning disability services at that time meant that we were very much in the forefront of shaping the changes. The All Wales strategy was a forward-looking policy designed to deliver a range of community services for people with learning disabilities. So as a team and as a social worker, I was very much involved in the development of community services and the move from large mental handicap hospitals, as they were then known, to homes in the community for people. The ethos was very much about inclusion in their own communities, inclusion in their own decisions, in their own assessments, their own care plans, a person-centered approach. The All Wales strategy ensured that people with learning disabilities had, perhaps for the first time, real opportunities and choices. They had the right to have a normal life in the community, to be treated as individuals, and to get the extra help and support they needed to reach their potential. I felt really privileged to have been working alongside individuals at that time to enable that immense change to happen. Then finally, the whole area of safeguarding adults. Throughout my practice, I've been very much involved in supporting adults with learning disabilities who've been abused. I was an ardent supporter of pioneers in the field, people like Professor Hilary Brown and the late Anne Craft. Now, Anne Craft also had a Welsh connection. She studied in Swansea University. She qualified as a social worker in the 70s. And then she found herself working in Bryn y Neuadd Hospital in Llanfairfychan in North Wales, which was one of the larger old-fashioned mental subnormality hospitals, what a horrible phrase, where she began to articulate the needs of residents for sex education and for them to have support in their relationships. She believed passionately the service users deserved to be given the information they needed to make sense of their own lives and personal options. At this time, there was no legislation around safeguarding adults, although many local authorities had their own policies around the abuse of adults with learning disabilities. Then in 2002, I had the privilege of becoming the second adult protection coordinator in Wales. Gradually, other local authorities appointed adult protection coordinators, and as we all came together to share our experiences and practice, this developed into an All Wales Coordinators Group. From there, we developed practices, policies, guidance, and the All Wales Policy and Protection of Vulnerable Adults. So we shaped the practices, we shaped the policies, we shaped the procedures across Wales, and all of this fed into the first legislation that we had in Wales around safeguarding adults, which is the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. So 40 years flown by, and just 3 areas where there's been such a change in the way that social work is shaped and practiced. I feel so privileged to have had such a small part to play in all of these areas. After 40 years, I still think it's the best profession to be a part of. If I had it to do all again, I would make exactly the same career choices. Diolch yn fawr. Back to you, John.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much, Meryl. We've just got time for a couple of quick questions. Some that have come up. We can't cover everything, but I'm just going to ask for a very short answers from our panelists. One of the questions that's come up, what one message would you give to someone starting out as a social worker today? So what one message would you give to someone starting out as a social worker today? Heidi, can you help us with that? You'll have to switch your microphone on before you can do it.
Hang on to your values, never give up on who you are and that basic value base that makes you who you are.
That's fabulous. Gerry, what would be your one word of advice?
I think, again, the value base, and also just remember the very privileged position you're in as a social worker.
That's great, thank you. And we've heard the ups and downs of many of us have experienced during the lockdown, described as the Corona coaster as we've gone up and down. How have you coped? Siobhan, how have you coped with the ups and downs of the Corona coaster?
Wow, how have I coped? Well, I've learned a lot about technology. I've done a few YouTube videos to keep myself connected with students that I miss immensely working with students. So doing a few things online with students has been fabulous. And I've held hope, I suppose. There's so many things that have just been so different in my life, but social work is all about change and dealing with change. So that's how I've done it, I think.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you for all the questions. I'm afraid we haven't had time to get round to them all, but thank you very much for your contribution. So our time together is drawing to a close. It remains for me to say a big thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. Thanks as well to members of BASW's excellent staff team for helping to make this event happen, including Amanda Beattie, Steph Davis, Jane Shears and Gabby Zavoli. So thanks very much in particular to all of you listening in, for your interest, for your engagement and your questions. The webinar and associated resources will be available on the BASW website in due course. And please watch out for details of our next series of events in June as we continue to mark our 50th anniversary year. So finally, stay safe and be kind to yourself and others. Goodbye.